Ric Flair has a new podcast. For those who aren't aware, he's had it now for a little while. It's hosted by Mark Madden. Woo Nation. Uncensored. This is his latest podcasting endeavor before he gets bored, and then, of course, he quits this like he quit the last show that he did years ago. But Flair has been commenting on various topics, and one of the topics that came up in a recent show with Madden was Bryan Danielson. And I want to read you the quote here, and I know some people would say, why are you giving Flair all this time? Because this is something I think that just needs to be said. I want to read this quote. This is what he said in reference to Bryan Danielson, who a lot of people have said Bryan Danielson's the best wrestler in the world, or he's the best wrestler in the last 20 years, or the best of all time. Everybody has their opinion on what they think of Bryan Danielson. Flair chimed in with this. I didn't say that he wasn't a good worker. When Hunter put him over, that being at WrestleMania 30, that made him. He's a very talented kid, don't misunderstand me, but you have to have one match, one place, one day, somewhere, that makes you who you are. Hunter, who only wrestles once in a while, came out and the match started off slow, but they ended up having a world-class match. He's a hell of a performer. I don't see him as being Kenny Omega. As a babyface, he's not Ricky Steamboat. As a heel, he's not me. If that pisses people off, they have to live with history. They tore the joint down. That is the night that made Bryan. I like him a lot personally. He's got a style. He's not AJ Styles by any means. He's a little bit smaller than AJ. He's not AJ Styles. I like his conditioning. He works hard. He'll do anything and sacrifice his body. He'll throw himself around and take incredible bumps. He's a hell of a hand. You're asking me who is good and who is great. He's very good. As a babyface, it's more believable. He can sell his ass off. So when he's making a comeback, it's more fun to watch him make a comeback against bigger guys. It is harder for me to believe he's going to hold someone down. As a babyface who is just average size but loaded with talent, I much prefer to see him fighting from underneath. There's a lot in what Flair said that is not untrue. Flair talking about how he's a great babyface who does the whole babyface comeback thing. He's a better babyface than a heel to him because he can believe that he's fighting back from underneath, and it's harder for him to believe him as a heel holding somebody else down. I get what he's saying. That's a very old school mentality because he's thinking about Bryan just being in the ring with bigger guys. I would argue that Bryan most of the time is in the ring with guys who are about the same size as him. So Bryan Danielson being a heel 25 or 30 years ago would have been less believable. Yes, I think Flair is still in that mindset. Bryan Danielson in 2021 wrestling a lot of the people that you'll find on the AEW roster, let's be honest, it's really not all that unbelievable because they have a lot of smaller or average size guys who work in that company, so it works. But I don't disagree with him that as a babyface, working from underneath, more believable that way, and, you know, making the big comeback, loaded with talent. But what I took issue with is this notion that it was Triple H that made him. The idea that Hunter is the one that made him. Ric Flair saying Bryan Danielson wasn't made until Triple H put him over at WrestleMania. As if he wasn't already the biggest babyface in the fucking company is a comically bad take. And I don't know if Flair is intentionally saying some stupid shit on some of these shows to deflect from the Dark Side of the Ring controversy, or he's just doing it to get downloads for his new podcast. Probably a little bit of both. And I'm talking about it, so I guess to that extent it's working. But again, the notion that it was that match and it was Triple H in that match at WrestleMania in New Orleans that made him. You know, Flair has been critical of certain wrestlers over the years. Flair, you know, for somebody who really is in the ring, he'll go down as one of the greatest of all time on the Mount Rushmore when it comes to all-time professional wrestlers. A lot of people, not everybody, but a lot of people's Mount Rushmore. He also, a lot of times when he talks about other people and some of the contemporaries and people he worked with many years ago, he comes across as one of the most insecure of all of the top stars and main eventers that I have ever heard. And I think I would wager that in a lot of those guys, you would find a lot of insecurities. Flair is not the only one. But over the years, Flair has been critical of certain people. He's been critical of Bret Hart. I think a lot of that is just because Bret Hart shit all over him back in the mid-90s, and so he felt he had to fire back. But he shit on Bret Hart. He shit on Mick Foley. He called him a glorified stuntman, and later on they worked a program together based off of it. He said in his book that he didn't consider Randy Savage to be a great worker because he couldn't just get in the ring and improvise, and he wrote out his match ahead of time with Ricky Steamboat at WrestleMania 3. He couldn't get over that. He wrote the match and planned the match out spot by spot for Mania against Steamboat, because Savage wanted that match to just go off perfectly. I'm sure if Savage had gotten in the ring and just had a match on the fly with Ricky Steamboat, they still would have had a very good match. But, you know, as Steamboat said, Savage he was obsessed with going out there and stealing the show that night and having a great match and wanted to make sure that everything went pitch perfect. And so they'd be, you know, hanging out together backstage, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Savage would spit out a number for a spot that he had written down, and Ricky would have to rattle it off the top of his head. That's how obsessed Savage was when it came to that WrestleMania match. But it's funny to me to hear Ric Flair saying that Randy Savage was not a good worker because he planned out that match with Steamboat at WrestleMania. This is coming from somebody who basically worked the same exact match for over 40 years. And I say that as somebody, I like going back and watching classic Ric Flair matches. You know, the Ric Flair 3-disc DVD set that came out over a decade ago is one of the best DVD sets that WWE ever produced. It's one of my favorite ones that I ever bought. There's a lot of good shit on there. The matches with Barry Windham, and the matches with Sting, and the matches with Vader, and the 92 Rumble. And I mean, we could sit here all day talking about classic matches that Ric Flair has been involved in. So I am a fan of his work, but he has worked the same fucking match for over 40 years. I mean, what a ridiculous fucking statement to make about Randy Savage. So he's had some suspect takes over time. They're his takes, they're his opinions. I'm just commenting on what I think of those opinions. The idea that Triple H and the match they had at Mania is the one that made him is a joke. Now, Flair's frame of reference over the last 20 years is going to be somewhat limited. And I know Triple H is his boy. That's why he says it. Triple H is his boy. He swings from the man's nuts the way that he used to swing his dick around on all those airplanes. I get it. But my God, even if he's only talking WWE, and I'm sure he is only thinking of WWE, Flair is not even considering Danielson's Ring of Honor run, because to him that's Bush League minor league shit. It doesn't count because it's not Vince. It's not WWE. It's not WrestleMania. So therefore, it doesn't count. But we can't talk about Bryan Danielson, I think, without first talking about the run that he had in Ring of Honor, because that's the run that really set him on his path. That's where he made a name for himself. That's where he became the best in the world. And I wish I could find the interview many, many years ago. Triple H did an interview. Since we're talking about Triple H, I think it's funny to kind of bring it back around to him. There was an interview years ago that Triple H did. And I remember reading the transcript, and he, I don't know if he brought this up on his own, or if somebody else said to him, who do you think is the best in the world? I think he brought it up himself. But he made a comment to the effect of, you're not really the best in the world. You can't be the best in the world until you come work here. It was clearly a veiled shot at all the people who I'm sure Triple H had to listen to for so many years, talking about Bryan Danielson, this indie darling, as the best in the world. It was a veiled shot at him. You haven't made it until you've made it here, is basically what he was saying. That's what Flair is saying, in effect. But you can't ignore the run that he had in Ring of Honor, because he had great matches with every single person they put him in the ring with, up and down the line, from the Samoa Joes and the Nigel McGuinnesses and the Takeshi Morishima's international talent they would bring in. I mean, this guy was fantastic, and that's what earned him a contract in the first place for a guy who, when you look at him, did not look like somebody WWE would ever be interested in. I mean, there's a reason why people joke around and say, hey, you look like Daniel Bryan without the beard. WWE wouldn't look at me either and think, hey, this guy's got superstar written all over him. And that's what Daniel Bryan looks like. So why did they sign him? Why did they bring him in? Because they realized that he had talent and that he can work his ass off. But let's put his Ring of Honor run on the side then. Because I would argue that he's been the best or in the conversation for the best now for, as far back as the mid-2000s. I don't even think that could be debated. But let's ignore that and look at his WWE run, right? He wasn't brought in with the idea of ever being a main eventer. I don't buy that for a second. I don't think they looked at him that way. I think they looked at him as like Flair said, a good hand. He's a hell of a hand. He can come in like look at Dolph Ziggler. Look at the way they've used him over the years. Put him in the ring. He can work with anybody. He can, bump and work his ass off. But what ended up happening is, I would take it back to the 18-second loss to Sheamus at WrestleMania 28. That's really what set him on his way. We just didn't realize it at the time. And neither did WWE. They lucked into that one unwittingly. Do you believe that when they did that with Bryan at WrestleMania 28, that they had any fucking idea the movement that it was going to create? If anything, they probably looked at it as a giant pain in the ass because all these people suddenly were hijacking shows, chanting the guy's name and chanting yes and putting their fingers up in the air. So I would even say that you could take it back to that 18-second match at WrestleMania 28 is the match that really made him. What about the cage match with Bryan and Bray Wyatt against the Usos on Raw, which led to one of the greatest moments in Raw history when he split away from Bray Wyatt. He shed the skin of the Wyatt family, and to look out into that crowd and hear them, to hear the reaction that he got that night was incredible. It's one of those Raw moments that you look back to. I look back in the last 5, 6, 7 years, there aren't very many moments like that. And he was part of that one. You could even point to that if you wanted to, as the moment that really cemented him in the eyes of the fans. But if you had to distill it down to one match, and this is the one that I wrote on Twitter, if you have to distill it down to one match, like what Flair is doing here, from his WWE run, forget the Ring of Honor stuff, I would argue it's his win over John Cena at SummerSlam in 2013. That's when Bryan first won the WWE title. He didn't hold it for very long because they did that great swerve when the match was over, which I loved, where Triple H went heel and he pedigreed him, and I thought the way that angle came off with the big surprise there was great. I could understand why people were pissed. I mean, that was the intended effect. But the match with Cena, I think sometimes it gets overlooked because there was a match of the year on the show that night with Brock Lesnar and CM Punk. But John Cena and Daniel Bryan went out there. They had an incredible match. John Cena was the face of the company, not Triple H, not anybody else. Even then, at that time, John Cena was the guy. And Bryan went in there. He wrestled him. He beat him. He pinned him cleanly. 1, 2, 3 in the middle of the ring in the main event of the second biggest show of the year, and he won the championship. That did more to cement him as a top player in that company than his match with Triple H. As great as the match with Triple H was, that wasn't even the match of the night that set him on his way. That was Batista, the big guy, tapping out for Bryan at the end of the night to hand him the championship. The visual of Batista, this giant man, laying in the middle of the ring in the main event of WrestleMania and submitting. That's not the way I expected Bryan to win the belt. I figured he'll pin somebody, he'll pin Orton or somebody. To tap out Batista, to me, I would even put that over the match with Triple H as a bigger star-making moment. As a moment that you could point to and say, okay, this guy has arrived. But again, Flair swings from this guy's nuts so much. It's blinding to him because Triple H is his best friend. It's his boy. I understand Triple H is the person that gave Flair his confidence back. When Flair lost his confidence, he was wearing t-shirts whenever he would go out and wrestle, and it was Triple H who had to say, man, you're fucking Ric Flair. Flair never forgot that. Triple H has stuck up for him so many times over the years. So of course, he's going to favor his boy. But that is a ridiculous take. And even if you only look at it in WWE terms and ignore everything else, ignore the rest of his body of work, I would put the match with Cena at SummerSlam as the match and the night and the moment that he truly arrived in that company.